Welcome to the Smiling at the Future podcast. My name is Christy Rose, and this is my pursuit to glean practical wisdom on femininity, homemaking, finances, relationships, and singleness from the God-fearing men and women in my life. Hope you enjoy this journey with me as we learn to smile at the future. Hi, ladies. We have our beloved Lynne Brown back on the podcast today to provide an extra dose of encouragement for those of us who feel left behind in life or stuck in our season of singleness. So this conversation should touch on a handful of ways those feelings can impact our hearts and how we can think rightly when we are discouraged. But before we jump into that discussion, Lynne Brown would love to invite you ladies to subscribe to her email newsletter titled Faith, a Refusal to Panic. It's a monthly publication, and if you enjoy listening to Lynne on this podcast, you will also enjoy reading her content. She is working towards building a robust email list for the ministry that she has, so that would be a huge blessing to her, and I will link that in the show notes where you can go and subscribe. But without further ado, once again, Lynne Brown on trusting God when you feel left behind in life. Lynne Brown, you need no introduction for the ladies who have been with this podcast for a while, because I think this may be getting close to 10, if not more, episodes over the past 5 years or so that the podcast has been running. But I love bringing you on because you are such a great communicator. You're a biblical counselor and you've walked through singleness longer than most. So you get it. You know the struggles of the heart and how to articulate the feelings of just those disappointments and discouragements in life. So thrilled to have you back. But for the ladies who will be tuning in for the first time and hearing you for the first time, can you share a bit about yourself and your background?
Well, thank you so much, Christy. I am honored to be here again. I love your podcast and your listeners. And so it's always just such a joy. I live in Camarillo with my husband of 16 years. I have 2 adult stepchildren. I've been at Grace Community Church for 24 years now. I'm involved in women's ministry and counseling and teaching, and my husband and I do marriage counseling. And I was single until I was 39. I got married just shy of my 40th birthday. So yes, I understand the struggle and the plight, and I am here to give as much encouragement as I can.
And this topic is just one of those more nuanced, fuzzy areas that I think most women kind of feel and think about in the back of their mind. But hopefully by talking it through, we can provide some encouragement and some comfort for the ladies. So we're going to just go through our questions here on, how do we move past that feeling of being stuck or left behind in life? I remember someone described this to me once, that she felt like if life was a train and you're all standing there waiting to get on the train, everyone else got on and somehow you got left at the station and everyone's moving on with marriage and kids and life, and somehow you miss the boat. You're kind of lagging behind. So that can be a tough feeling to navigate and perspective on your life. So how can we avoid comparison to our peers, those who've gotten on that train, who are moving, it seems like, effortlessly through life, and marriage and kids and everything just comes so easily to them? How do we avoid comparison when our life, we feel stuck?
Well, that is a great question. And I think it's important to define stuck at first. So is that there's a couple ways to think about it. Is that an accurate description of your life, or is that just a feeling? So in other words, are you really stuck? It depends. Is there something that you can do about your stuckness? I mean, maybe you want to further your education or get a different job or travel to Botswana. You can do those things, or you can at least try. You think maybe there's more things that I could be doing. I could give myself some forward momentum. Do I need to carpe diem and seize the day? Perhaps you feel pricked in your conscience because you're not serving in church to the degree you think you should be. Maybe you're lagging in spiritual disciplines, or I always think, are you stuck at 160 pounds and you want to be 140? Well, you can do something about all of those circumstances. You can serve the church with greater fervor. You can get up early and get on the treadmill. You can give yourself forward momentum in those areas. And sometimes I think those little changes just really help. You can send out resumes in search of another job. This is a caveat, though. That doesn't mean that the Lord is going to move you. And I will just give you a quick example because this happened just recently. I felt very stuck at my job. I had been there 20 years, nowhere for me to go, it seemed. And I applied to Oaks Christian School. And this was about 15 years ago. And I thought the position they were offering was perfect for me. I got letters of recommendation. One of the letters was from a member who served on their board. I had all this experience on and on. Well, they never gave me a second thought. I never heard from them. And I was talking to a daughter of a friend of mine recently who got a job at Oaks about 6 months ago. And I told her my story. And she said, that's so funny because I thought the job, when she was applying, she said, I thought it was a long shot. I didn't even include some of the things they were asking for. I kind of half did it. They called me for an interview right away. I went in and they hired me immediately. So that is just a great example. I could not understand why that door would not open, that I was going to have to stay, let's say, at what I felt like was a dead end job for longer, but it ended up working out really well. I finished that job and I didn't have to go back to anything after I got married. So I couldn't foresee that, but the Lord knew. Now, my friend's daughter couldn't not get hired because that was God's will for her. So if I could go back in time, I would have told myself, you're not stuck. Just wait a little longer. So that's just an example. And there are things that you can change if you feel stuck, but some things that you cannot change. Obviously, a lot of your listeners are in a season of singleness. Life looks very much the same, and you are discouraged because you think it's always going to look the same. And I think you may need to think about that term stuck. I'm stuck in my singleness. And I know that's what it feels like. But that's where you change your language when you're counseling yourself and you say, I'm not stuck. This is where the Lord has sovereignly placed me. So it's intentional and it's from a great and loving God who knows what I need. So if I'm at point A and I still feel like I'm at point A, that is where I'm supposed to be. It's not time for me to move to point B. And I think that there are a lot of people in scripture who probably could have made a case for being stuck. We know the outcome on this side of it, but Hannah was stuck in her barrenness. She eventually had Samuel, the great prophet. Leah was stuck in a marriage where her husband didn't love her. Her whole life was trying to be loved and accepted by her husband to garner the attention she so desperately wanted. Scripture says in Genesis 29, when the Lord saw that Leah was unloved, he opened her womb, but Rachel was barren. So Leah conceived and bore a son, and she named his name Reuben, for she said, the Lord has surely looked on my affliction. Now, therefore, my husband will love me. And then later, God had endowed me, she says, with a good endowment. Now my husband will dwell with me because I have borne him 6 sons. So Leah pined for the love of her husband, but it didn't happen. And I find it interesting, though, because in the book of Ruth, when Boaz redeems Ruth in front of the city, he says, you are my witnesses this day. And this is in 4:11. And all the people who were at the gate and the elders said, we are witnesses. The Lord make the woman who is coming to your house, so that would be Ruth, like Rachel and Leah, the two who built the house of Israel. And may you prosper in Ephraim, however you pronounce that, and be famous in Bethlehem. So scripture doesn't record that Leah ever got what she wanted, but God has this tremendous role for her. Leah was the mother of Judah, the tribe of Judah, who has this great significance in scripture. in building the house of Israel. And I think of Anna in the temple. She was only married for 7 years before she was widowed. And she lived all of her days until she was 84 in the temple, serving night and day with fasting and prayer. I'm sure there were times she might have felt that she was stuck for good, right? that's a long time. She was alone. She was old. She never left the temple. She served all the time. But then she had this remarkable moment of seeing the Christ child, and because she was waiting for that redemption. So I just, I look at all the saints who were stuck in prison. But what does Paul say about his chains? They added to the spreading of the gospel. And, of course, my favorite person left behind is Joseph when he's in prison. And he asks, he says, when the butler and the baker are released in Genesis 40, he says, "But remember me when it is well with you, and please show kindness to me. Make mention of me to Pharaoh, and get me out of this house. For indeed, I was stolen away from the land of the Hebrews. And also, I have done nothing here that they should put me into the dungeon." And the chief butler did not remember Joseph, but forgot him. How many days and nights did he have to think about that? Perhaps dwell on his brothers and their treachery and how they were out freely living their lives, but he was languishing in prison. So talk about everybody else just sailing right on by with their lives, and here I am stuck. But the Lord had intentionally placed him there to bring about everything that needed to happen in the future, not only for Joseph, of course, but for the nation of Israel. So make peace with the things that you can't change. And I know that's harder done than said. But whatever that intentional place God has you, you have to think of it like that. I'm not stuck. This is right for me for where the Lord has me now. And never compare yourself. And I know you ladies know this, but really don't compare yourself to someone else, because we never quite know the half of it. And I think I've said this on the podcast before, but it bears repeating. My husband and I do marriage counseling, and you look up these people on Facebook and they look like they have a big, happy family with no problems. And I know I don't have to say this, but your social media feed is not helping you live a contented life, right? It's a good way to foster the wrong kind of thoughts about other people's lives. And I'm not saying that social media is all bad, but you have to be really discerning. I'm listening to this sermon series from Paul Twiss, Bethany Bible Church, and he says, don't meditate on what you see, meditate on what you know. And we know that, but he's going through Ecclesiastes. And I love Ecclesiastes because everything I don't understand, I put in that box. And Paul talks about what you're dwelling on. And he makes the point that we know the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. But he says there's a sense in which if you're in that mode, that wisdom will find you. And I think that's so key. We have to be dwelling on the things where wisdom will find us. And I just love that point. And he draws really insightful conclusions. And I think especially with Ecclesiastes, and maybe you can put it in the show notes, a link to his series, because Ecclesiastes, just that really weary heart that says, I just don't understand, Lord. I'm having such a hard time making peace with this situation. I would recommend that for the listeners. So just briefly, back to what's going on with other people. You really don't know what's going on behind closed doors. You know what? You don't even know the turmoil that may be going on in your friend's heart. And this person you see sailing through life, well, maybe, but you don't even know what's around the corner for them. So comparing is not helpful, because remember, it's tweaked in your mind. It doesn't cultivate a heart of gratefulness, because you're not really seeing that situation clearly. It's tainted by your own assumption. And it can be clouded by jealousy, which we know what God says about that, about coveting, which is do not do it. And that can be a very difficult fight. I've had to wrestle some of those thoughts to the ground, and it's really hard, at different times in my life. There's always, though, an unfulfilled desire or a goal or a dream that hasn't come to fruition. You get married, check, great. That's done. But then the next thing you desire perhaps remains unfulfilled. And so we've talked about that before, right? One more bridal shower that isn't yours. And I know that's hard, and I remember it so keenly, but I've said so many times, and it's so true, that discontentment follows you. So it goes back to believing that it's not about the person next to you. You've got to train yourself that whatever God is doing in your life right now is good and right and just and holy and perfect, because God is good and right and just and holy and perfect. Psalm 138:8, the Lord will perfect that which concerns me. Your mercy, O Lord, endures forever. Do not forsake the work of your hands. So that's how I would respond to that question that I know so well and felt so keenly, and still remember feeling like, yes, I'm standing on the shore, and I'm always waving the cruise ship goodbye, and
Yeah.
I'm never on it.
And I appreciate what you said at the beginning, Lynn, about how just because this is how your life has been up to this point doesn't mean that that's your future as well. We don't know what's around the corner, what God is going to be doing. So even if it feels like a very long season of waiting for a desire to be fulfilled, it could change. And I've just seen this in so many other lives around me. I know I've brought up my sister and her story before, but she was a piano teacher for 20 years almost. Probably, yeah, about 20 years. Her life didn't change a lot. I mean, of course, she's developing skills, and I appreciate that you brought that point out, that even if you feel stuck in your singleness, that doesn't mean that you're stagnating in all of life. Like, you can be cultivating gifts and skills and learning new things and just developing as a person. And so you don't have to feel that way in all areas of life. Really maximize the benefits of singleness and what the gifts that you can give to others with your time and energy. But with my sister, yeah, she went from being a piano teacher for 20 years to within less than a year married to a missionary living in Africa, and just like completely switched life trajectory. And life is nothing short of exciting, and sometimes too exciting, with living in rural Africa. But yeah, she could have looked at her, and she got married at 36. She could have looked at her life and just say, like, this is just never going to happen. And I'm just going to be teaching piano till I'm 75 and have a house full of cats. But just so fast, it can change so fast. It can happen so quickly. And I think of that so often, of like, okay, yeah, 3 months from now, I could be dating someone seriously and maybe engaged. And you just like, you're going to look back at your singleness and be like, oh man, I wish I had really like capitalized on some of that extra time. And I wish I'd learned this and done this. So kind of think that way, like, be hopeful, be expectant of what your future could hold, and then just really hone in on, okay, right now, what would I wish that I had done and focused on with this time that I have? So let your energy be poured into that instead of just stagnating, waiting, being discontent with where you're at.
Exactly, because you could be missing out on some great things that the Lord has right in front of you. And it's true, you can never get that moment back or that time back. So, yes, go for it. That's why I said carpe diem. I love that. Just seize the day and do in the dailies and do what the Lord has put before you, because it isn't always going to be the same. And again, I know I can't tell you how many times I said that to myself, to the Lord, wrote it in a journal. I was just talking to a single gal, 31 years old, and I said, every year, my friend and I would go to Barnes and Noble with our journals, and we would write down, Lord, let this be the year. It's 2000, whatever, let it be the year. And I wrote it on my prayer sheets with my prayer group. And then I said, and lo and behold, that year, 2007 or 8, whatever it was, that was the year. But I just kept writing it down and saying, you know what? I have to think the right thoughts about the Lord, good and big thoughts. Now that, not that he's just going to give me a little bit, but that it's going to be great. And I still remember with my friend, we would talk about relationships. And one of the things that was really encouraging, and I might have said it before, but if you look at the wonderful relationships that God has given you in your own life right now, maybe you have great parents, maybe you have great friends, maybe you have a wonderful church family. Is he going to be any less faithful in a spouse? And to think about that in terms of, oh Lord, you've given me so much and you've been so faithful and so wonderful in the relationships that I currently have. Why would I think that it's not going to eventually happen and that that's not going to be great too?
Yeah. And that's such a good point because I think some believers have that misconception that God is just, wanting you to suffer relentlessly and never give you gifts. And that's not the heart of our God. He uses suffering. We do live in a sin cursed world. So we are experiencing that and he redeems that suffering. But he also delights to give good gifts and abundantly, exceedingly beyond what we can ask or think. That is his generous heart, his kind heart to us. So yeah, expect that he's going to give and ultimately gives us himself, which is the best gift of all. So
Exactly. I was going to say, you hit it right on. You hit it right at the heart of it, right? Which is, for God so loved the world that he what? Gave, right? He gave. And so we need to think right thoughts about how wonderful he is. Mm-hmm.
and I really like how you brought up all the points on comparison and jealousy and envy. And that is can be the thief of joy in this season if you're constantly looking around at other people. And Jerry Bridges in his Respectable Sins book has a whole chapter on this. And one of the quotes that I like is he said, if you spend your emotional energy on envy or jealousy, we lose sight of what God might do uniquely in our lives. So just focus on, before the Lord, what are the talents he's given you? And you are responsible for that. Don't look at everyone else and what they have and what they're doing with their talents. God's given you a unique calling, unique gifts, and he expects you to steward them and to give him glory with those. So spend more time thinking about what he thinks of your life than what other people think or what you think of other people's lives.
Yes, perfectly said.
Okay, so one funny question, and I've gotten this a few times, and I know what people are trying to get at when they ask this question more often than not. If you get the question, what's new in your life? Or can you share, how do you answer that? Because they're just asking if you're dating, if you're currently dating or in a relationship. So how do you answer that when nothing is really new in that category?
Right, right. Well, I think, and I remember the question well, of course. And so I have something to say about that. But I think when we're thinking about that question and we're thinking about our lives in our own heart, the first thing to remember, because it can be discouraging. So the first thing to remember is that we have the greatest of all privileges as Christians when we think about newness, because it's not true that nothing is new. And his mercies and his goodness and his kindness are new every morning. And I love Lamentations 3:22, though the Lord's mercies were not consumed because his compassions fail not. They are new every morning. Great is his faithfulness. So just thinking about that as a Christian, and this kind of also goes back to stuckness. If you're a Christian, you are being renewed day by day. That is the truth. 2 Corinthians 4:16, therefore we do not lose heart, even though our outward man is perishing, yet the inward man is being renewed day by day. And that means to cause to grow up, new, to make new strength and vigor is given to me. and to be changed into a new kind of life. And so that I think is really encouraging. God is making us more like his son day by day, and that's constantly occurring. The inner self of the believer is growing into maturity. We are changing. We are being sanctified. And so think about that just in terms of that question, not only with newness, but also stuckness. And then you can always tell someone what God is doing in your life. You can always just talk about a spiritual and edifying response of what your highlights are. How is the Lord working? And, we do or say things all the time that we think are mundane or don't matter. Kind of that's a lot of our perspective, like, oh well, nothing's really new. It's the same old thing. But I think even of the hymn writers, when people talk about the hymn writers, and there's some famous ones, we might know their name, but most often we don't. We've never heard of this person. And little did they know that their song would be sung in the Christian church and bless hearts for centuries. So one little small act of faithfulness or a word of encouragement, you don't know how God is using it. You don't know how meaningful that can be to someone and so important to someone on a given day, and that God is going to use it. We're always salt and light every day that we're on the planet. Just your presence wherever you go. If you're at your desk behind your computer all day at a job, you are salt and light in that place. And just remember that you're not the only one who doesn't think anything is changing or anything's new. This is funny because this example actually came to my mind before I looked it up. And I thought, the thing is, you ask a married mom with kids, a couple of young kids, what's new in her life, right? Well, not much, just changing another dirty diaper. I mean, those years are very much the same to them. Everything kind of runs together. So it's never your circumstance. It's always your perspective on your circumstance. And I thought this was really interesting. This woman on this blog wrote, so I'm going to quote her. She says, as a stay-at-home mother of four, my days are full of mundane tasks, endless cycles of preparation and cleanup for everything from dinner to laundry. Yes, there are tender moments that make it all worthwhile, but it's easy to feel like the bulk of my life's work, is mundane, unspiritual, and insignificant. Okay, until she says, I turn my gaze to Jesus. So, and I loved this point that she made. She said, Jesus celebrates mundane activity done in his name, which I thought was really interesting because you do this single or married. So in the final days, Jesus, what does he say to his followers? Come, you who are blessed by my Father, inherit the kingdom prepared for you from the foundation of the world. For I was hungry, and you gave me food. I was thirsty, and you gave me drink. I was a stranger, and you welcomed me. I was naked, and you clothed me. I was sick, and you visited me. I was in prison, and you came to me. And so, those are just activities. This is the gal talking, that she says, I'm most tempted to despise, that Jesus actually celebrates. Like, I want to be freed up. She says, I want to be freed up to do these other things. She's kind of longing a little bit to be unencumbered with marriage and kids. Right. So she's looking at it from that side. And she just says, hunger, thirst, strangeness, nakedness, sin, sickness, imprisonment are things that won't be in heaven. They are mundane in the most literal sense. They're of this world and they are temporal. And so we have this unique occasion, she says, before the return of Christ, to serve him in a way we won't be able to forever. And so that's so true, because she makes the point that what does Jesus care about? Extending hospitality in the body of Christ, bringing someone food and drink and visiting them when they're sick. We would say those are simple pedestrian acts that anyone can do. You don't need a PhD to take care of someone who is ill or bring someone a casserole. Okay. And then she says, it's true. I love this quote. Oswald Chambers summarized the idea when he said, the test of a man's religious life and character is not what he does in the exceptional moments of life, but what he does in the ordinary times when there is nothing tremendous or exciting going on. And that's exactly right. And of course, we know a lot of times when you're single, people are asking that question because they want to know if you are dating anyone. And I think, of, of course, we want to say that we are. And I think the question is dreaded because it reminds us of the unfulfilled desire staring us in the face. And you know what? It's probably not the answer that anybody wants to hear, but there's no way around it. There's just no way around it. You have to swallow that bitter pill and turn it into a prayer. God knows it's a hard question and that it can feel like a fiery dart. So just put up your shield of faith, because I know you want to be able to say, I've met someone. That's the penultimate when you're single. You can't wait for that question. When the guy finally comes along, you can't wait. You're all, okay, who's going to be the first person that's going to ask me? Because then you're just bursting to say, yes, I'm dating someone. I met him and it's great. All of that. So the Lord knows that. He knows that that's what you're looking to say. And I still remember my friend when she met her, who would become her husband. She went on one date with him and she immediately got her in her car and called her parents and said, I met him. He's the one. And so we long for that, of course. And just remember that the Lord knows. He knows. And that's been Father filtered, right? That comment has come to you through a good and wise and loving God. It's not to needle you. It's to help you to trust him, turn it into a prayer, put up your shield of faith. And of course, that person means well. I mean, most of the time, right? They just want to be encouraging and they're hoping probably and praying for you too.
Yeah, so good to think about that. It doesn't come from a place of ill will. They are hopeful for you, and they know that that could be something that you are wanting in your own life, and so they're curious and want to rejoice with you. But we're going to move on here to the final question in this episode. And one thing that can be a struggle is if you are kind of delayed in the whole marriage process, you can be in the newlywed class with people that are much younger than you. If you have kids in your 30s or early 40s, you're going to be kind of going through those early motherhood stages, and your peers may have teenage children. And so there's just kind of this imbalance. And I've seen a couple of friends experience this where they got married later in life and they had a harder time relating to their peers. So, how would you encourage listeners if they find themselves in that position? How do they navigate that awkwardness?
Well, perhaps I am just the eternal optimist because I'm thinking if I'm talking to someone right now who is maybe 40 and not married yet, let's just say, I don't think you're going to care. And this is why I say that. It's a little like the first time I went to Italy. Ask me how long the flight was or the logistics of this and that. I don't remember anything except how excited I was to go. And it was the same with getting married. And I think it would be for having kids. I mean, I was almost 40, like I said. My husband was 46, I think. And he had been married twice already. And here we are in the premarital class, outdistancing the other couples by 10 to 15 years. We didn't care. We had a great time. So I think it's just a bridge you'd have to cross when you get there, but you will find your tribe. I really think that there are other people in the same boat. Now, it may be less, maybe few and far between, but I do believe that you'll run into them. And I do believe, God facilitates all those relationships. And ladies, those of you who are getting close to 40 or even really mid 30s, there's a good chance you might marry a widow or you might marry someone who's been divorced. So that's another subject, but there are a lot of those people have kids already and you have a ready-made family. So that takes some adjusting. But if you're going to have kids, just if you're older on a practical level, it's like stay fit, healthy, and energetic because there's pros and cons to that. And you just have to roll with it. You'll be more tired than your younger counterparts, but you'll probably be wiser and more mature. So I would say there's always when I think about this question, there's always some type of awkwardness or imbalance in our lives. That's just a given. So I think it's important, again, not to compare your situation with someone else. If God gives you a baby at 45, wow, that's wonderful. Now, that will be a lot different, though, than if you had a baby at 25. But just how amazing for a baby in any scenario for that to happen. So I think we just make the mistake of saying that our marriages are supposed to look like that and we're supposed to have kids like this and at such an age. And I just think those are unnecessary rules that we put around things. So, there's older women in the Bible, we know, right, that had babies, and then we have Boaz and Ruth relationship that looked different, but what an amazing relationship. They were part of the genealogy of Jesus. So, just not to box yourself in on how things are going to look and how others will perceive you. It only matters if you are loving and serving the Lord in your marriage and in your family. And I think that he'll work out the details. So I think, just like I said, there's always something probably in our lives. I mean, how many awkward moments for different reasons have you had? It's just like, Lord, I guess I just have to accept that that's sort of the way things go. Because, of course, like back to the heaven question, we're not living in a perfect world. We're living in a fallen world, and it's just going to look different. But everything that comes from the Lord, every good and perfect gift is from the Father of lights. No variation or shifting shadow. And so we can just be so confident, I think, in that and jazzed about that. And however he has facilitated your relationships, those are good. And if it's from him, it's great. And so if it's later in life, it's later in life. If it's early, it's early. And you just roll with it.
Yeah, and he'll give the grace, and of course, we know he's in charge of the timing of all of that. So if he's had you wait longer and get married later, he'll give you the grace to cross those bridges, like you said, maybe trying to, as much as you can, stay fit and healthy if you still want to have kids and you're going to be having them later in life. Do the best you can to prepare your body for that. But God, yeah, he'll give you the grace. If he wants you to have kids, he'll give you the grace to do that. And one interesting thing that I've noticed is that the women who have had to wait longer for marriage, there's just another level of thankfulness to the Lord for answering that prayer. There's been so many more years backed up behind that event, praying for a spouse, that when it comes to fruition, God answers that prayer. It is so joyous for everyone who's prayed alongside you, for you. So that is a sweet thing about waiting longer for some of those seasons of life. You just have more joy, even if it is a little bit harder, you're a little bit older, but you do, I feel like the joy is more maximized. And I like how you said you have more maturity as well in some of those seasons, which is super helpful. Just recognizing God's in charge of the timing and don't compare. And yeah, he'll give the grace to walk through that. So Lynne, I just so appreciate how you're articulating some of these kind of fuzzy areas, fuzzy fears that we have in our lives, and you kind of made them a little more concrete by talking us through them and just offering encouragement and just how we should be thinking about some of these areas of life from a more hopeful, biblical perspective rather than just more earthly comparison type ways of thinking. So thank you again. It was such a joy to have you back, and I can't wait to share it.
It was great. It was great to be here.